She ran for 19 weeks. 19 weeks of silence, of swallowed tears, of convincing herself she didn't matter to him anymore. She packed her whole life into one suitcase and told herself it was survival. But survival doesn't prepare you for the moment his hand closes around your wrist at Gate 47 of Incheon International Airport, and his eyes drop straight to the curve of your stomach. Everything you've been running from just caught you. And the worst part? The look on his face isn't anger, it's devastation. If this story already has your heart pounding, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain outside Incheon International Airport was not the kind of rain that cleaned anything. It came down in flat, hostile sheets, the kind that turned the glass walls of the terminal gray and made the world outside look like it was being erased. Inside, the air was recycled and cold and smelled faintly of jet fuel and duty-free perfume, and the noise, the rolling suitcases, the overhead announcements in 3 languages, the soft percussion of 1,000 people moving through a building designed to funnel them out of the country, all of it pressed against Zariah Brooks like something physical. She had not slept in 31 hours. Her feet hurt. The low left side of her back had been aching since Seoul Station, a deep, grinding ache that started somewhere around her sacrum and radiated outward with every step. She was 5 months along now, 22 weeks, though the number felt both enormous and impossible, and her body had started to announce its condition in ways she couldn't argue with and couldn't ignore. The slight forward tilt of her posture, the way she pressed her free hand against her lower back without thinking, the way strangers on the moving walkways glanced at her stomach and then away, performing the universal choreography of people pretending not to notice a pregnant woman traveling alone. She noticed them noticing. She always did. Her carry-on rolled behind her on 3 working wheels, the 4th dragging slightly and catching on the polished floor every few feet. She hadn't bought a new bag because she hadn't planned on being in Seoul long enough for the broken wheel to matter. She'd planned to be in and out, signed the final paperwork at her attorney's downtown office, retrieved the personal documents she'd left in the apartment she'd shared with Jae-min for 8 months, and then gone. Back to Los Angeles. Back to her mother's guest bedroom. Back to the careful, suffocating life she was reconstructing from whatever pieces hadn't burned. The paperwork had taken 3 days instead of 1. Her attorney, a meticulous woman named Ms. O, who communicated entirely through measured sentences and tight smiles, had discovered a discrepancy in the original filing that required additional documentation. Zariah had sat in that glass and steel office on the 32nd floor of a building in Mapogu and stared at the Han River through the window and thought about absolutely nothing. That was the skill she'd developed in the past 5 months, the ability to make her mind go flat and still and empty, like a lake after a stone has finished making its rings. She was good at it now. She was getting better every week. Departure Gate 47 was 12 minutes away. The boarding announcement had already cycled twice through the speakers, the cheerful, synthesized tone followed by the calm voice announcing final call for KEO 86 direct to Los Angeles. Zariah tightened her grip on the carry-on handle and lengthened her stride. Her boarding pass was in her jacket pocket, already creased from being checked and rechecked. The obsessive habit of a woman who had learned that things she counted on had a way of dissolving when she reached for them. She was 40 feet from the gate, then 30. Then a hand closed around her wrist from behind. The contact was not violent. It wasn't rough or jerking or the grab of someone who wanted to hurt her. It was a full, certain grip, the grip of a person who knew exactly where she was going and had made a calculation about how much time remained. That deliberate quality was what stopped her cold more than the physical contact itself, because she recognized that deliberateness. She had felt it before, in the way he'd once held her face between his hands and said things she'd spent 5 months trying to forget. She stopped. The noise of the terminal continued around her. A child 2 gates down began crying. The boarding announcement cycled again. Somewhere behind her, rolling wheels and footsteps and the white drone of ventilation. She did not turn around. For 3 seconds, she stood there with her back to him, her carry-on handle still in her left hand, his hand still around her right wrist, and she made one last attempt to convince herself she was wrong. That it was someone else, a stranger who'd grabbed the wrong person by mistake, a security officer, anyone. Then he spoke. "You were leaving." The voice was low, not loud, not performative. It was the same voice that used to call her name from 2 rooms away and make her feel like she was already being held. Deep and quiet and absolutely certain, and it had not changed at all in 5 months, not even slightly. And that was almost the cruelest thing she'd encountered since the airport departure sign. She turned. Kang Jae-min looked exactly like the photographs that had been destroying her since March. That was the first thought she had. Irrational, useless, and true. He was wearing a black suit, the kind that didn't have a visible label because it didn't need one. The kind that was so precisely constructed it looked less like clothing and more like a statement of intent. No tie. His collar was open by one button. His dark hair was slightly damp from the rain. She could see the residual moisture along his hairline. And his jaw carried 2 days of growth, which was unusual for him. Jaemin had always been meticulous about his appearance. The slight roughness of the stubble looked less like carelessness and more like evidence of nights that hadn't been easy. She didn't let herself read too much into that. His eyes moved to her face first, then down. There was a particular quality to the silence that followed. It wasn't the silence of someone who didn't know what to say. It was the silence of someone processing the difference between the thing they'd suspected and the thing that was now standing in front of them as undeniable fact. His eyes stayed on the curve of her stomach for a long moment, not staring rudely, not performing shock, just looking. And then they came back to her face, and whatever she'd expected to find there, it wasn't what she found. It wasn't anger. It wasn't the cold, closed expression he'd worn the last time she'd seen him. It wasn't the controlled, calculating look that she'd come to associate with his public face, the face he wore in boardrooms and at press events and in every photograph that had appeared on international media since January. It was something much harder to handle than any of those things. "You were leaving with my child." The words were quiet. Not an accusation, not even quite a question. More like a man saying something aloud because keeping it internal had become physically impossible. Zoraya's jaw tightened. "That's not—" She stopped, reorganized. "Let go of my wrist." He released her immediately. Stepped back 1/2 step, creating distance, his hands going to his sides. Around them, the airport continued its indifferent business. No one was paying attention yet. They were just two people having a quiet conversation beside Gate 47. But Zoraya was aware of Jae-min's security detail positioned at careful intervals. She recognized one of them, a broad-shouldered man named Hyun-soo, who had once driven her home from a gallery opening when her feet hurt. He was stationed near the gate entrance, looking at the middle distance with the professional vacancy of someone paid to see without appearing to. "There are 4 flights," Jaemin said, "between here and Los Angeles today." "I know. You booked the first one." "I booked a seat on a plane. That's not a conversation." "Zoraya, don't." The word came out sharper than she intended, the restraint she'd been practicing for months fraying at its edge the moment he said her name like that. "Don't say my name like I owe you an explanation. You don't get that." He was quiet for a moment. She watched him absorb the hostility without flinching, the way he always absorbed difficult information. By going very still and very controlled, his face closing down to something neutral, while whatever was happening underneath worked itself out beyond her visibility. "How long?" he said. How long have you known?" She stared at him. The boarding announcement played again. Final call. She glanced at the gate where the line of passengers had thinned to the last few stragglers. The gate agent was looking in their direction. Zoraya was going to miss her flight. She knew it the moment she admitted to herself that she wasn't going to pretend she didn't understand the question. Something in the way he was standing, not blocking her, not threatening her, just existing in her periphery with that particular weight he carried, made lying feel impossible. She was tired of lying. She'd been doing it for 19 weeks, and it had cost her more than she'd calculated. 19 weeks, she said. Something moved across his face and disappeared. 19... He stopped. 19 weeks, she said again. "You have your answer. I have a flight." She reached down and picked up her carry-on handle. Her hand was not entirely steady. She hated that. She'd spent 5 months building steadiness, the specific kind of steadiness that comes from deciding to stop waiting for someone to come back and starting to believe you're better without them. And his hand on her wrist for 6 seconds had compromised it in ways she didn't want to examine. She walked toward the gate. Jaemin fell into step beside her. "I'm not doing this," she said, not slowing. "The gate is closed." She looked up. The gate agent had begun pulling the jet bridge door. The agent caught her eye, registered the urgency in Zoraya's expression, and looked apologetically at the door she was already securing. The flight closed. Zoraya stood at the end of the gate corridor and stared at the glass for a moment with her hand still on the carry-on handle and her jaw locked tight and everything she'd carefully managed for 19 weeks pressing against the inside of her chest. Then she turned and looked at Jae-min. "You had someone delay it." "No. Don't." "I didn't touch the flight," he said, and his voice was steady enough that she believed him against her will. "The departure board has been showing a weather delay for the past 20 minutes, the rain on the runway." She looked up at the overhead board. KEO 86. Delayed, 90 minutes. She looked back at him. "I need to sit down," she said, because her back was doing the thing again, and the overhead lighting was starting to feel aggressive, and she had been on her feet for too long. It was not a capitulation, it was physiology. She told herself that clearly. He led her to a row of seats near the window, not the ones closest to other travelers, the ones at the end. She sat without acknowledging the gesture and placed her carry-on between them with deliberate precision. He sat and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped, and he looked at the rain on the glass for a moment before he looked at her. "You were going to raise the child alone," he said. "Yes." "Without telling me." "Yes." He absorbed that. Why? The word was so stripped of everything extraneous that for a moment she didn't know how to respond to it. Not, "Why did you do this?" Not, "Why would you think that was acceptable?" Not the catalog of grievances she'd half expected. Just why? Small and direct and unanswerable, without honesty she hadn't planned to offer. "Because you'd already made your choice," she said. "And it wasn't me." The silence between them had texture after that. It wasn't empty. It was full of the specific weight of things that had been accumulating for months. Every photograph she'd seen, every unanswered message, every morning she'd woken up in her mother's guest bedroom and lain there for a few minutes before the day's requirement for functioning reasserted itself. "The photographs," he said. "Don't." "Zoraya." I said, "Don't." Her voice was controlled but barely. "I'm not doing the conversation where you explain the photographs. I saw what I saw. You were standing next to Chairman Kwan's daughter at a private dinner. You were smiling. There were 15 separate instances across 3 months. I'm not a child, and I'm not stupid." "I know you're not." "Then don't talk to me like I misread something." "You didn't misread what you saw," he said, "but you didn't see everything." She looked at him directly for the first time since sitting down. He was already looking at her. The expression on his face was one she hadn't encountered before, or hadn't recognized before, and she found, to her intense irritation, that she couldn't simply dismiss it. There was something in it that looked like grief, the kind of grief that comes from a specific cause, not a general one, the kind that has a shape. "The divorce papers," she said. "Yes, I signed them 3 months ago. Miss O walked me through. I never filed them." The sentence landed between them and sat there. Zoraya's breathing changed. She was aware of it, the slight catch, the recalibration, and she kept her face still through it, but her hands tightened on her thighs. "What did you say?" "I never filed the divorce papers," Jae-min said. His voice was utterly level. "The documents Miss O presented to you were not the documents I authorized. They were a fabrication. The signatures attributed to me were forged. The filing confirmation she showed you was fabricated. I have a legal team that has been working on verifying this for 6 weeks. The terminal noise continued around them. Somewhere a child was laughing. The rain on the glass hadn't let up. "That's not—" She stopped. Her throat was tight. Who would— "Chairman Kwan's office," he said. "His network has been working to dismantle my position for 2 years. I am a problem for him because I control 3 infrastructure contracts he needs for his political coalition. To move me, he needed to eliminate the people I protect. You were considered leverage. If you believed the marriage was over, you would leave. If you left, my focus would shift. If my focus shifted, there were contracts he could maneuver around me." She was looking at him. "The photographs were orchestrated," he continued. "Chairman Kwan's daughter is engaged to someone else. She was placed at those events deliberately. The photographs were distributed to channels that would ensure you saw them. I did not know until 8 weeks ago that this was happening. I thought you had chosen to leave." The last sentence came out quieter than the rest. "I thought you chose to leave," he said again, with the emphasis shifted. I received documentation that you had engaged an attorney. Then I received your signatures on papers I never signed myself. I spent 6 weeks trying to understand what I had done, and then my investigator found the anomalies in the filing. Zoraya's hands were very still on her thighs now. You thought I left you, she said. Yes. And I thought you left me. He didn't say anything. For 5 months, she said. You thought I left you, and I thought you left me and our child. Her voice broke on the last word, and she stopped and pressed her lips together and waited until the steadiness came back. It took longer than she'd wanted. Our child existed this entire time, she finished, and neither of us— I know, he said. Don't just say I know. You don't get to just say I know. You're right. Stop agreeing with me. I need you to— She pressed her fingers against her mouth for a moment. I need a minute. He gave her one. The rain outside had shifted direction. It was hitting the glass differently now, coming in at an angle, and the light through the streaked panes threw a fragmented pattern across the terminal floor. Zoraya sat in the fractured light and breathed steadily and tried to do the math on what he'd told her and discovered that the math wasn't the problem. The math was simple. The problem was everything that sat underneath the math. All the weeks of believing she understood exactly what had happened to her. All the careful, painful work of reorganizing herself around that understanding. And now the understanding itself had been taken apart in an airport gate seat. I need verification, she said finally. I have documents. I need to see them myself, with my own attorney, not yours. Yes. And if what you're saying is true— She paused. If what you're saying is true, then someone has been working against us from inside both our circles, which means I don't know who I can trust. No, he said, you don't. Including you. He met her eyes. Including me, he said, and that was not what she'd expected, and the unexpected honesty of it hit her somewhere that she'd been protecting for months. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked down at her stomach and placed one hand flat against it, a gesture so habitual now that she did it without noticing, the instinctive reassurance of someone who had been the only protection a small person had for 19 weeks. His heartbeat has been steady, she said. She wasn't entirely sure why she said it. She hadn't planned to. Jae-min looked at her hand on her stomach. Something in his face shifted and resettled, and it was the realest expression she'd seen from him since the airport entrance, raw in the way that very controlled people look when the control slips for a second and the thing underneath is something they weren't prepared to display publicly. He said. She looked up. She confirmed. And then there was a different kind of silence between them than the one that had been there before, and neither of them moved for a while. The 90-minute delay passed in pieces. They did not talk about the marriage. They did not talk about Chairman Kwan or forged documents or the 6 months of carefully engineered separation. Zoraya asked for water, and Jae-min produced a bottle from somewhere with the seamless efficiency of a man whose environment was perpetually managed, and she drank it and her backache receded to a dull murmur. And they sat together in the airport seats with the carry-on between them like a deliberate boundary, and the subject they did talk about, haltingly, carefully, the way people handle something they're afraid of dropping, was the child, not the pregnancy in the abstract. The child is reality. She told him about the first ultrasound, the one at 10 weeks in a clinic in Koreatown where she'd stared at the grainy monitor image and not fully believed it was real. She told him about the week at 16 weeks when she'd stopped sleeping properly because her dreams had taken on a quality she didn't want to describe. She told him about the name she'd been tentatively considering, alone, without telling anyone, because saying it aloud had felt like a commitment she wasn't sure she deserved to make without the other half of the equation. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer parallel narratives or redirect toward his own experience. He just listened, and she'd forgotten that this was something he did, actually listened, in the particular way that made you feel like the words you were saying mattered to the person receiving them. She stopped herself from finding comfort in it. When the reboarding announcement came over the speakers, she stood, gathered her carry-on, straightened her jacket. Jae-min stood beside her, and for a moment they faced each other in the complicated light of the terminal. 22 weeks of shared future between them and 6 months of manufactured wreckage and a conversation that had raised more questions than it had answered. I'm still getting on that flight, she said. I know. I need to go home. My mother doesn't know. She stopped. There are things I need to handle in Los Angeles. My life there. I understand. Don't follow me. I won't. She studied him for a moment. His face was composed, that familiar discipline reasserting itself, but around his eyes there was something that hadn't been there when she'd first turned around. A quality of alertness, maybe, or held breath. Send the documents to Ms. Park, she said. Ms. Park was her own attorney, the one she'd hired independently in September, 3 weeks before the divorce. Not Ms. Ms. Park. Yes, he said. She nodded once, picked up her carry-on, walked toward the gate. She did not look back, but she was aware, with the particular heightened awareness of a person whose world has just shifted on its axis, that he watched her until the jet bridge door closed. The flight to Los Angeles was 14 hours. She spent the first 3 staring at the seat back in front of her and recalculating everything. At hour 4, she fell asleep, and the sleep was dark and dense and dreamless. And when she woke over the Pacific with her hand on her stomach and the cabin dim around her, the calculation was still unfinished. She thought about forged signatures, about engineered photographs, about a man who said he'd never filed the papers and looked like grief when he said it. She thought about what Ms. Park would find when she read the documents. She thought about her son's heartbeat, steady as a metronome, wholly indifferent to everything happening outside his current world. She pressed her hand more firmly against her stomach and stared at the dark window and thought, I need to know the truth. Not his version, not Chairman Kwan's version, not Ms. O's carefully managed version, the actual truth. And the actual truth she was beginning to understand was going to be worse than any single version she'd already been given. She didn't know yet how right she was. Los Angeles met her in gray morning. LAX at 6:15 a.m. had its own specific texture. The overcast sky, the exhaust-heavy air, the particular exhausted efficiency of international arrivals at that hour. She cleared customs in 35 minutes and found her mother's car idling at the curb, her mother at the wheel, a woman in her mid-50s who had spent the past 5 months watching her daughter carry something alone and deciding not to push. Her mother looked at her face as Zariah settled into the passenger seat and then looked back at the road and said, What happened? I'll tell you when we get home, Zariah said. Her mother drove. At the apartment, Zariah showered and changed and ate the breakfast her mother made without entirely tasting it. Then she sat at the kitchen table with her phone and called Ms. Park. I need you to look at something, she said when Ms. Park answered. I have incoming documents. They came from Kang Jae-min's legal team. I need you to tell me whether the divorce filing is legitimate. Ms. Park's pause was brief and professional. When should I expect them? Today, Zariah said. He said today. They arrived at 3 in the afternoon. Ms. Park called back at 6. The original filing is fraudulent, Ms. Park said. Her voice was careful and measured and entirely without hesitation. The signatures are forgeries. The filing timestamp has been falsified. The confirmation documents you were shown were fabricated. As of this moment, under Korean family law, you and Kang Jae-min are legally married. Zariah sat on the edge of her bed in the room she'd been sleeping in since August and looked at the wall. I see, she said. There's more, Ms. Park said. Tell me. The attorney who handled the proceeding, Ms. O, appears to have been working under retainer from an entity called Kwan Capital Management. The retainer predates your engagement with her by 8 months. She was placed in your path, Zariah. She didn't find you through a referral. The referral itself was manufactured. The wall in front of her was pale blue. Her mother had painted it that color the summer Zariah turned 14. She had always found it calming. She found it very far away right now. So everything, she said. Most of it, yes. My attorney, the papers, the photographs. Based on what I'm seeing, Ms. Park paused. Someone built a very complete fiction, and you were inside it without knowing the walls existed. Zariah thanked her, set the phone down on the comforter, put both hands flat on her thighs, and breathed steadily. She was still married. She had been married the entire time. Her son, and the word son still landed with a slight shock, the shock of a thing so real it hadn't entirely become normal, had been conceived inside a marriage that had never technically ended, to a man who claimed he hadn't known she'd left because he'd believed she was the one who left. She sat with that for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called a number she'd deleted in August, and rememorized in October because her body had apparently refused to let her forget it. He answered on the second ring. "Miss Park confirmed it," she said. Silence. Then, "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't apologize yet. I'm not done being angry." "I know that too." "I have questions." "Yes." "Not tonight," she said. "I'm not doing this at—" She checked the time. 8:15 on 3 hours of sleep. "I need to think." "Okay." "Don't call me. I'll call you." "Okay," he said again. She ended the call. Set the phone down. Lay back on the bed and stared at the pale blue ceiling of the room her mother had painted when she was 14. Outside, Los Angeles was doing what Los Angeles always did, humming its indifferent background hum, full of traffic and ambition and the specific amnesia of a city built on constant reinvention. She lay there and thought about what it meant to discover that the prison you'd been living in had never had any walls at all. She thought about the man who said he hadn't known. She thought about the man, Chairman Kwan, who had built the prison and waited for her to stop checking for the door. And deep in the center of everything, steady and rhythmic and entirely unconcerned with geopolitics, or forged documents, or the machinations of men who treated families like currency. Her son kept moving. She pressed her hand against the movement and felt it, that small, persistent flutter that meant something was continuing regardless of everything else. But Zoraya wouldn't sleep that night, because the text that arrived at 11:47 p.m. wasn't from Jae-min. It was from an unknown number, and it contained 3 things: a photograph of her standing at the LAX curb that morning, a photograph of her at her mother's kitchen table from a vantage point that meant someone had been outside the window, and 6 words: "We know where you are. Stay quiet. Bus." The photograph was taken from street level. That was the first thing Zoraya's mind processed before the fear arrived, before the adrenaline hit her bloodstream and made her hands unsteady. Street level, outside angle, the kitchen window of her mother's house visible through a gap in the neighbor's oleander hedge. Whoever had taken it hadn't needed equipment. A phone camera would have done it. A person walking a dog. A person sitting in a parked car on a residential street in Koreatown where nobody looked twice at parked cars. She sat up on the bed. Her heart was moving fast. She was aware of it the way you become aware of machinery that's been running quietly in the background. Suddenly audible. Suddenly present. Suddenly impossible to ignore. She held the phone in both hands and looked at the photographs again with the same clinical attention she'd used on the Ms. Park documents, extracting data rather than feeling, because feeling was something she could not afford right now at 11:47 p.m. in a house where her mother was asleep 20 feet away. The LAX photograph was time-stamped by its metadata. 6:43 a.m. She had cleared customs at 6:15, which meant someone had been at the curb before she arrived or had tracked her flight and positioned accordingly. Not random. Coordinated. The kitchen photograph had no visible timestamp, but the light through the window matched approximately 2 p.m., which was when she'd been sitting at the table with the phone to her ear talking to Ms. Park. So they'd been there all day. She moved to the window before she'd made a conscious decision to move, pressed herself against the wall beside it, and looked out at the oblique angle, the way she'd seen people do in movies and had never imagined doing herself, and found the street below looking entirely ordinary. 3 parked cars, sodium lamplight on the asphalt, the oleander hedge across the way rustling slightly in the evening wind, a cat on a porch railing 2 houses down, tail curled, watching something in the yard below. Nothing. Which meant nothing. She called Jae-min. He answered before the first ring completed. "Someone is watching my mother's house," she said. A beat. Then the controlled alert quality she'd heard in his voice during their conversation at the airport, only sharper now. "Tell me." She told him. Read him the message verbatim. Described both photographs. Heard him relaying information to someone else in the background, low and rapid Korean, and registered without quite registering it that he'd been awake at midnight Seoul time with someone nearby, which meant he'd anticipated this, or something like it. "Don't turn any lights on," he said when he came back to her. "They're already on. Leave them as they are then. Don't change anything in the house's pattern." A pause. "Is your mother?" "Asleep." "Wake her carefully. Don't use the word dangerous. Tell her there's a situation and she needs to dress and be ready to move quickly if you come for her. Don't explain more than that. You're telling me how to manage my own mother. I'm telling you what my security team is telling me in my other ear, he said. Tell me what you need me to adjust. She exhaled. Nothing. That's fine. I have people in Los Angeles. They've been there since yesterday. You had people here before I called you. Yes. You had people here before I told you about the text. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Because you knew this was coming. Because I knew Chairman Kwan's network doesn't leave loose ends, he said. And you are a loose end. The airport encounter changed the calculation. The photographs that were taken at the airport. There were photographs at the airport? Bystanders. 3 separate individuals. I'm told they were uploaded to social media within 40 minutes. By the time you boarded, there were international media queries going to my communications office about the... He paused. About your condition. She pressed her fingers against her mouth briefly. So everyone knows, she said. Not everything, but enough. Kwan's people will know that I know now. They'll know their operation has been exposed to me. That changes what they're willing to do. Meaning they become more dangerous. Meaning they become more direct, he said. Yes. She walked to her mother's door, stood outside it. Through the wood she could hear the slow rhythm of her mother's breathing, the particular quality of deep and unworried sleep, and something in that sound made the fear sharpen into something more personal and harder to metabolize. Her mother had not signed up for any of this. How long until your people are on this street? She asked. They're already on the street. They have been for 2 hours. I see, she said. Then, after a moment, I hate that that's the first thing that made me feel better. I know. I'm still angry. I know that too. She put her hand on her mother's door. I'll call you back. She opened the door quietly and crossed to the bed and put her hand on her mother's shoulder and said her name. Her mother was not the kind of woman who came out of sleep slowly. Eleanor Brooks, a woman who had worked the overnight shift at Cedars-Sinai for 11 years and learned to move from sleep to function in under 30 seconds, opened her eyes and looked at her daughter's face and said, What's wrong? It wasn't a question. Eleanor Brooks had learned long ago that the tone you used for questions gave people the option of saying nothing. I need you to get dressed, Zariah said. There's a situation. I'll explain everything, but right now I need you dressed and downstairs with your important documents and your medication in a bag. Her mother looked at her for exactly 3 seconds. Korean trouble? She said. Yes. Is it his people or someone else's? Someone else's. Eleanor Brooks sat up and pushed back the covers. Tell me while I pack, she said, Zariah told her. The edited version. The version that conveyed the essential structure without the parts she hadn't fully processed herself. Ms. O. The forged documents, Chairman Kwan, the photographs, the text, the 6 words. She talked while her mother moved around the room with the unhurried efficiency of someone who'd always suspected this situation might arrive and had decided not to waste energy on panic when it did. Eleanor packed a canvas bag in 4 minutes. Documents, medication, the photograph from the mantel downstairs that Zariah didn't have to specify. She knew which one. You're still married to him, her mother said. Legally, yes. And he's here. His people are outside. Her mother stopped and looked at her directly. Eleanor had a way of looking at people. A nurse's look. A look that had learned over decades to assess what was real beneath what was presented. And she used it on Zariah now, without any softness in it. Do you trust him? She said. Zariah didn't answer immediately. She was aware of the weight of the question, of the very specific trap in it. The difference between trusting someone's intentions and trusting someone's capability, and the other difference between trusting and having no better option. I trust that his people will not let anyone touch you, she said. That's what I'm certain of right now. Her mother studied her for a moment longer. Then she picked up the canvas bag and said, That's a more honest answer than most people would give. They moved downstairs. Yunsu was at the front door 4 minutes later. Zariah recognized him through the peephole and opened the door, and he inclined his head with the same professional courtesy he always showed and said, There were 2 vehicles on the street, one in front and one at the corner, and that they were requesting Zariah and her family relocate to a secured property in Koreatown for the evening. My family is one person, Zariah said. My mother. Yes, Ms. Brooks. What's the property? An apartment complex Mr. Kong maintains for organizational use. The building has controlled access, a private elevator, and security staff on all 4 entry points. A safe house, her mother said from behind her. A secured residence, Hyun-soo said. Eleanor considered him. Do you have coffee there? Yes, ma'am. Then let's go, her mother said. The apartment was on the 8th floor of a building in Koreatown that looked entirely residential from the street. Brick, modest landscaping, an underground parking structure with a gate that required both a code and a key fob. Inside, the apartment was clean and warm and had no personality whatsoever, which was the signature quality of a space maintained for function rather than habitation. Zariah had slept in 3 such spaces during their marriage, during periods when Jaemin had assessed certain threats as requiring a change of location. She'd resented them then. She hadn't fully understood what they were for. She was beginning to understand now. She got her mother settled, the guest room, the correctly stocked kitchen, the coffee machine that Hyun-soo had correctly predicted would be there, and then she sat at the dining table in the main room and called Jae-min again. The text came from a relay number, she said when he answered. Ms. Park says it's untraceable through normal channels. I know, my people have it. Stop telling me your people have things I'm still finding out about. A pause. That's fair. What do they actually have? The number traces to a prepaid device purchased in Seoul 3 weeks ago. It was activated the day you booked your return flight to Los Angeles, which means they've been tracking my movement since the booking, she said. Yes. She pressed her thumbnail against the table's edge, hard enough to feel. And you didn't know I was coming to Seoul? No. A beat. I found out the morning of. I was in a meeting with my logistics director when my communications team flagged that your attorney's office had filed a request with the property registry for access to our shared address. That was how I knew you were in the city. I came to the airport. He stopped. You were there when I arrived, she said. I was there 2 hours before your arrival, he said. I spent those 2 hours in a car outside the terminal deciding whether to go inside. She sat with that image for a moment. Jae-min in the back of an SUV outside Incheon, running whatever calculation he ran when the variables included her. Why did you go in? She said. Because the alternative was watching you leave the country again, and I'd already done that once. The silence between them was different than the airport silence, less armored. She broke it. Tell me about Chairman Kwan. What do you want to know? Everything you didn't tell me when we were married because you were managing my exposure. The pause on his end was brief. You knew I was doing that. I knew. I didn't know the scope. She pulled her hair back from her face with one hand and held it there, a habit she had when she needed to think clearly. He's political. I know that. I know your organization has contracts he wants. I know he has a daughter he was positioning to marry into your network. What I don't know is why a man with that much infrastructure was willing to forge divorce documents and surveil a pregnant American woman across 2 countries. Because I refused him, Jae-min said, 3 times, across 14 months. He offered the alliance through traditional channels first, business partnership, then his daughter, then leverage against my organization's legal exposure in the Southern distribution contracts. I refused all 3. The 4th method was removal. Gone. A pause. He didn't need me dead. He needed me destabilized. A man navigating a collapsing marriage, a departure from the country of his primary operation, a scandal in the international press. Those are things that create exploitable windows. He manufactured the collapse. He manufactured the conditions that we both responded to predictably, Jae-min said. That is what made it effective. He didn't forge our decisions. He forged the information that drove them. She let out a breath. He knew us. He had people inside our circle for at least 18 months, possibly longer. Mizzo, and at least 2 other individuals I haven't fully identified. The words landed with a specific quality. She heard what was in them. Not just information, but the residue of what it felt like to find out that the space around you had been infiltrated by people paid to witness and report. She knew that feeling from the past 5 months. She just hadn't known where it came from. Who else? She said. I don't know yet. In your organization or mine? Both, possibly. He said it steadily, without deflection, and she recognized that this was the quality that had originally disarmed her about him, the willingness to say difficult things straight. "So we can't trust anyone around us," she said. "There are people I trust completely. Hyun-soo, my director of operations, Park Sung-jin, 3 others, 5 people. Yes, you built an empire and you trust 5 people. I trust exactly as many people as I've had reason to trust," he said. And the sentence was so undefensive and matter-of-fact that she couldn't find anything to push back against. She stared at the blank wall of the safe house apartment. "I'm not going back to Seoul," she said. "Not right now. I can't. I know. My doctor is here. My mother is here. My son's medical records are here." She pressed her hand against her stomach. The familiar flutter was there, responsive, continuous. "I'm not uprooting everything because Chairman Kwon decided I'm a useful piece on his board." "No," Jaemin said. "You're not. But you think I should." "I think Los Angeles is harder to secure than Seoul," he said. "I think Chairman Kwon's network has demonstrated it can place assets near you with less than 12 hours of lead time. I think the text tonight was not a final warning. It was a first one." A pause. "What I think is not what I'm asking you to do." "What are you asking me to do? Tonight?" "Nothing. Tomorrow, I would like you to meet with Sung-jin, who is flying in from Seoul in the morning, and hear the full security assessment. Then you decide. I will support whatever you decide." She registered the texture of that sentence. "I will support whatever you decide. Not I will ensure. Not I will arrange." She filed it without comment. "Send me Sung-jin's credentials," she said. "I want Ms. Park to run background before the meeting." "Already sent to Ms. Park," he said. "You anticipated that." "I know how you work," he said, and there was something so straightforward in it, not proprietary, not manipulative, just accurate, that she found it harder to maintain the careful distance she'd been holding on to since the airport. "Get some sleep," she said. "It's late in Seoul." "I'll sleep when I know you're secure. I'm in your safe house with 4 security personnel on the door. I'm as secure as I get. Good night, Zaraya." She held the phone for a moment after he hung up. Then she set it face down on the table and looked at the window. The Los Angeles night was the color it always was. Never fully dark, always that oxidized amber glow from the streetlights and the traffic, and the million separate lives being lived in proximity. She should sleep. She knew she should sleep. The baby's pediatric consultant had been specific about sleep. Specific in the way of someone who dealt with enough stressed, exhausted, expectant mothers to have abandoned gentleness, and Zaraya had been compliant about most things. Sleep, nutrition, movement, the daily monitoring protocol she'd been following since week 16. She went to the window instead. Park Sung-jin arrived at 9 the next morning. He was a compact man in his late 40s with a face that had learned to show nothing and eyes that were absorbing everything. The apartment layout, the positions of Hyun-soo and the second security officer by the door, Zaraya herself, her mother in the kitchen visible through the pass-through. He sat at the table across from Zaraya and placed a slim folder on the surface and folded his hands on top of it and waited. "Ms. Park ran your credentials," Zaraya said. "I know. She called me at 7:30. "She called you directly?" "She had questions. I answered them." He met her eyes. "She appears to be thorough." "She is," Zaraya said. "It's why I hired her. Mr. Kang chose well when he—" Sung-jin stopped, adjusted. "You chose well." She acknowledged the correction with a slight nod. "Tell me about the security assessment." He opened the folder. What Sung-jin laid out over the next 40 minutes was the kind of information that reorganized Zaraya's understanding of the past 6 months, the way an earthquake reorganizes a building. Not destroying it entirely, but shifting the foundations until none of the walls quite stood at the angles they used to. Chairman Kwon's network, as Sung-jin described it, was not a secondary operation. It had been built over 22 years, interwoven through political infrastructure, financial networks, and private security organizations across 4 countries. It had a legal arm and an illegal arm and a large gray space between them where most of its effective work was done. Zaraya's case, the engineered separation, the forged documents, the surveillance, was not unusual for this network. It was standard methodology for removing obstacles to political consolidation. She had been assessed, surveilled for 14 months before she'd known about any of it, and then systematically isolated. They expected you to disappear, Sungjin said. A pregnant American woman, unmarried by all visible documentation, with no structural connection to Kang organization, no reason to fight, every reason to build a quiet life somewhere manageable. They underestimated me, Zoraya said. They underestimated that Mr. Kang would find you before you left the country. That was an accident of timing. Was it? Sungjin said. It wasn't quite a question. She looked at him. He looked back with that absorbing neutrality that reminded her, oddly, of Ms. Park. What's the current threat level? She said. The text last night indicates active monitoring. The fact that it was a warning rather than an action indicates they're still in an assessment phase. They want to understand whether the airport encounter changes your behavior, whether you'll remain in Los Angeles and wait, whether Mr. Kang will come to you or request you come to Seoul. He paused. The moment that assessment concludes, the warning phase ends. How long do we have? Days, he said, possibly less. Eleanor Brooks appeared in the pass-through between the kitchen and dining room. She'd been quiet through the entire meeting, the careful quiet of a woman who knew when to listen. Now she looked at Sungjin and said, My daughter is 22 weeks pregnant, and you're sitting at her table telling her she has days. Yes, ma'am, Sungjin said. What exactly is the plan to ensure those days don't become ours? That depends on decisions that need to be made this morning, he said. Eleanor looked at Zoraya. Zoraya looked at the folder on the table, at the clean, organized evidence of the machine that had been running against her life for over a year. She thought about the 6 words on her phone. She thought about her son's heartbeat, uninterrupted, persistent, indifferent to the geopolitics of his existence. What are the options? She said. Mr. Kang has proposed 3 scenarios, Sungjin said. Secured relocation to Seoul, where the organizational infrastructure can provide full-spectrum protection. No, she said. He blinked once, continued. Maintain presence in Los Angeles with significant security augmentation, though this carries higher exposure risk. What's the third? Neutral ground, he said, a secured property in Vancouver. Outside both the Korean and American networks, Mr. Kang has organizational connections in Canada that are independent of the structures Chairman Kwan has penetrated. 3 weeks. Enough time to work the legal and security situation to a resolution before he glanced briefly, professionally, at her stomach. Before the next phase of your medical situation requires stable infrastructure. Zoraya was quiet. Does Jaemin know you were going to offer these in this order? She said. He listed them alphabetically, Sungjin said. I reordered them by my own assessment of your likely responses. Why? Because I've been with Mr. Kang for 11 years. And in 11 years, I've learned that the most important variable in any situation he's in is not the external threat. It's what the person next to him decides to do. A pause. He told me your answer to the option of Seoul would be no. He asked me not to argue with you about it. She stared at Sungjin. Then she looked at her mother. Eleanor Brooks said, Vancouver's beautiful this time of year. Zoraya put both hands flat on the table, took one breath. Book it, she said. Sungjin was already reaching for his phone when the second security officer by the door straightened sharply and pressed 2 fingers to his earpiece and said something rapid and low in Korean that Zoraya didn't catch. Hyun-soo crossed the room in 3 steps. We need to move, he said. Now. Zoraya stood. What? Vehicle identified on the street, different from last night's surveillance pattern. Occupant photographing the building entrance. His voice was level and entirely without panic, and that levelness was the most alarming thing in the room. Mr. Kang has been notified. We have a window of approximately... He stopped. His phone in his left hand was vibrating. He looked at it. Something crossed his face. What? Zoraya said. Hyun-soo looked up. The vehicle is not Chairman Kwan's network, he said. She looked at him. Then whose... Mr. Kang's mother landed at LAX 40 minutes ago. The room went silent in a way that had nothing to do with sound and everything to do with what the words meant. Zoraya's mother set down her coffee mug in the kitchen. Sungjin went very still. Hyun-soo kept looking at his phone with the expression of someone who'd just been handed a problem that fell outside every contingency plan he'd... Hyun-soo was still looking at his phone when Zoraya said, "How does she know where we are?" The question landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Sungjin looked up from his own phone. The second security officer by the door shifted his weight. Eleanor Brooks stood in the kitchen pass-through with her coffee mug held in both hands and said nothing, which was the loudest thing in the room. Hyun-soo didn't answer immediately. That was the answer. "She knows where we are," Zoraya said again, "because someone told her." "Ms. Brooks, don't." She stepped toward him. "Don't manage me right now. Someone in this building, in this operation, told Jaemin's mother where I was relocated last night. Who was it?" Hyun-soo met her eyes. He was a man who'd spent 11 years in a profession that required him to absorb difficult situations without visible reaction, and he was doing that now. But there was something underneath it, a tightness around his jaw, a quality of controlled anger that she recognized because she was feeling it herself. "I don't know," he said. "Then find out." She turned away from him and called Jaemin. He answered in one ring. "I know," he said before she spoke. "Your mother is outside." "I know. I didn't tell her where you were." "Someone did." "I know that too." His voice was controlled, but there was an edge under the control she hadn't heard before. "Sungjin? Give me Sungjin." She handed the phone across the table. Sungjin took it and moved to the window and spoke in low, rapid Korean for 90 seconds. And the quality of his posture during those 90 seconds told her that whatever Jaemin was saying, it was not reassuring. She looked at her mother. Eleanor set down the coffee mug. "Do you want me to stay or go?" "Stay close," Zoraya said. "Don't open any doors." Her mother nodded once and moved back from the pass-through without another word. Sungjin returned to the table and held out the phone. "He wants to speak with you." She took it. "What?" "My mother has one person with her," Jaemin said. "A personal assistant. She came alone. That's not aggression. That's strategy. She wants a conversation." "I don't want a conversation with her." "I know. The last time your mother wanted a conversation with me, she offered me an envelope and told me to disappear." The silence on his end was brief. "When was this?" Zoraya stopped. She stood very still beside the dining table of the safe house apartment with the phone at her ear and the Los Angeles morning pressing gray light through the window, and she looked at the wall and said, 6 months ago, 2 days after I returned to Los Angeles, she came to my hotel." "You were staying at a hotel?" "Before I went to my mother's. I stayed 2 nights at the Intercontinental downtown. Your mother arrived on the second morning. She knew the room number. She sat across from me and put an envelope on the table and told me to name my price." "Zoraya, I didn't tell you because I didn't think it mattered." Her voice was steady. The steadiness cost her. "I thought we were divorced. I thought you'd sent her. I thought it was your way of ensuring I stayed quiet." The silence from Seoul had a different quality now. Not controlled. Something raw underneath it. "I didn't send her," he said. "I know that now." "She came on her own." "Yes." "She knew where you were both times," he said, and the way he said it had nothing in it that sounded like the careful man she'd been navigating since the airport. "A hotel that wasn't booked under your name. A safe house that my own team doesn't share outside of 3 people. She knew both locations." Zoraya's hand tightened on the phone. "She's been tracking me," Zoraya said. "For longer than either of us knew about," he said. "Zoraya, do not let her in the building." "I wasn't planning to." "Tell Hyun-soo, I'll handle it," she said. "I'll call you back." She ended the call. Looked at Sungjin. "How long has she been outside?" 19 minutes. "She's waiting for me to come down," Zoraya said. "She knows I won't let her in the building, so she's waiting for me to come to her." "You're not going down there," Sungjin said. "No." She looked at the window. "But I'm going to talk to her." She called down through Hyun-soo's communication channel, and 4 minutes later she was standing at the building's glass lobby doors with Hyun-soo at her left shoulder and the second officer at the door itself. And through the glass she could see the black Mercedes at the curb and the woman standing beside it. Madame Kang, she had never offered another name, not in the 8 months Zoraya had known her, was 71 years old and looked like something that had been built rather than born. She was slight in the way that certain kinds of strength are slight, stripped of anything excess, all bone and precision. She was wearing a charcoal wool coat despite the Los Angeles warmth, and her white hair was immaculate, and she was looking at the lobby doors with an expression that Zariah had catalogued the first time she'd met her. Absolute certainty about the outcome of whatever she'd decided to do. She was alone. Her assistant waited by the car. Zariah opened the lobby door 3 inches. "I'm not coming down and you're not coming up," she said. Madame Kang looked at her without surprise. "I wasn't going to ask." "Then say what you came to say." The older woman's eyes moved to Zariah's stomach in the same way Jae-min's had at the airport, direct and unhurried, registering information. Unlike Jae-min's, there was no devastation in the look. There was calculation. "You've spoken with Jae-min," Madame Kang said. "Yes." "He's told you about Chairman Kwon?" "Yes." "Did he tell you about the agreement?" Something in the word agreement, the particular weight she placed on it, made Zariah's hand tighten on the door's edge. "What agreement?" she said. Madame Kang was quiet for a moment. A car passed on the street behind her. Somewhere 2 blocks away, a siren rose and flattened out. 11 months ago, she said, Jae-min entered preliminary negotiations with Chairman Kwon's office. Not about the political alliance, about the southern distribution contracts. Kwon needed access to 2 specific infrastructure nodes. Jae-min needed political cover for a legal exposure issue in the Busan operation. She paused. The negotiation included a personal component. Zariah said nothing. Kwon's condition for the cover was the alliance with his daughter, Madame Kang said. Jae-min's initial response was refusal. His second response, 8 weeks later, was conditional acceptance of a preliminary discussion. The lobby air was cold. Zariah was aware of Hyun-soo at her left shoulder, very still, and of the fact that his stillness had a different quality than it had a few minutes ago. "You're lying," Zariah said. "I am doing many things," Madame Kang said. "Lying is not one of them at this particular moment." Jae-min told me he refused Kwon 3 times. "He refused the full alliance 3 times, she said. "The preliminary discussion is not the same as the full alliance. He did not tell you about the preliminary discussion." The door in Zariah's hand felt very heavy. "Why are you here?" she said. "Because my son is about to make a decision that will cost him everything he's built for 15 years, and he is making it based on a version of events that he has edited." She held Zariah's gaze. "I am not his enemy. I am not yours. I am a woman who has watched her son construct his entire life around the idea that if he protects people efficiently enough, they will not be taken from him." Mao Bachicai Bai. A pause. "He believes he can protect you by dismantling himself. He is wrong. Kwon doesn't want Jae-min weakened. He wants him destroyed. A weakened Kang organization with a vulnerable heir is a better target than a strong one, not a safer one." Zariah stared at her. "You came here to tell me to leave him," she said. "Again." "I came here to tell you the truth," Madame Kang said. "What you do with it is your own matter. And the truth includes an agreement Jae-min made with Kwon that he didn't tell me about." "Yes." "Show me." The older woman reached into her coat and produced a folded document. She held it out. Zariah looked at it through the 3-inch gap in the door and didn't move for a moment, and then she said to Hyun-soo, "Take it," and he stepped forward and took it from Madame Kang's hand. Zariah closed the lobby door. She stood in the lobby with the document in Hyun-soo's hand and looked at it without taking it, and thought very carefully about the difference between a lie and an omission, and decided that in the architecture of trust, that difference was a wall and not a door. "Give it to Sung-jin," she said. Hyun-soo brought it upstairs. Zariah followed. She sat at the dining table and watched Sung-jin read and registered every micro-expression that moved across his face, because Sung-jin's face was one of the most controlled faces she'd ever encountered, and any movement on it was significant. He read for 4 minutes. Then he set the document down and looked at her. "Is it real?" she said. A pause. "It carries the correct formatting for a preliminary organizational agreement. The dates are consistent with the timeline Mr. Kang described for the Busan exposure situation." Another pause. "I would need to verify the authentication markers. But if it's real," he met her eyes. "If it's real, Then Mr. Kang entered a preliminary discussion with Chairman Kwan regarding a personal alliance 8 weeks after his first refusal, without disclosing this to you. The discussion was terminated. The document shows a termination notation dated 2 months later, but it occurred. Zoraya pressed both palms flat on the table, hard. The pressure of them against the surface was the only thing that felt entirely solid right now. "Call him," she said. "Ms. Brooks, call him and put it on speaker." Sungjin called. Jaemin answered in 2 rings, and Sungjin put the phone on the table between them and said, "Mr. Kang, Ms. Brooks is here. I have a document in front of me. I need you to tell me whether it's authentic." He read the document header into the phone. The date, the reference number. The silence from Seoul lasted 9 seconds. She counted them. "Where did you get that?" Jaemin said. "Your mother," Zoraya said. Another silence. "It's authentic," he said. The word hit her somewhere below the sternum and stayed there. She breathed through it. She kept her hands flat on the table, and she breathed, and she looked at the blank wall of the safe house, and she did not let her face do anything that she hadn't decided to let it do. "You entered a preliminary discussion with Kwan," she said. "Yes. 8 weeks after you refused him. Yes. While we were married. Yes. And you didn't tell me." The silence this time was different. Not a thinking silence. The silence of a person who has been carrying something for a long time and has just felt it land somewhere outside themselves. "No," he said. "I didn't tell you." "Why?" "Because I terminated it." His voice was careful. "It was a preliminary discussion. It lasted 6 weeks, and I terminated it because I realized what Kwan was actually building, and I wanted no part of the full structure. I made a mistake in engaging at all. I didn't tell you because it was terminated and because—" He stopped. "Because what?" "Because you had already started to see the photographs. Kwan's team was already distributing them. I didn't know that then. I thought—" Another stop. "I thought if I told you I'd had a single preliminary conversation about his daughter while you were seeing those images, it would confirm what I was already afraid of," Zoraya said. "Yes." She took her hands off the table, put them in her lap. "So you protected yourself by keeping quiet." "I protected what I thought we still had by keeping quiet," he said. "I know that's not the same thing." "No," she said. "It's not." She reached across and picked up the phone and took it off speaker and held it to her ear. "I need you to understand something," she said, low and completely level. "You have told me, since the airport, that everything I believed was built on lies fed to us by someone else. That's true. I believe that's true. But this—" She pressed her fingers against her eyes briefly. "This is not Kwan's lie. This is yours. A small one. A terminated one. But yours." "I know," he said. "I've been trying to figure out what is real since Incheon. I have been rebuilding what I understand about the past 6 months, piece by piece, and every time I think I have the structure right, there is another piece that doesn't fit." Her voice didn't break. She would not let it break. "How many more pieces are there?" "No more," he said. "That is everything." "You said that before I found out about the preliminary discussion." The pause that followed had a quality she'd never heard from him before. Not controlled, not calculating. The quality of a man who has run out of the thing he uses to manage situations and is left with nothing but the situation. "I know," he said. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Your mother came here because she's trying to pull me away from you." "Yes." "But the document is real." "Yes." "So she used a real thing to do it, which means I don't know where her motive ends and the truth begins." She pressed her thumb against the edge of the phone. "I don't know that about anyone right now. I don't know it about Ms. O. I don't know it about Sungjin. I don't know it about you." "I understand," he said. "I need to think." "Yes." "Don't call me. Don't send anyone. I will reach out when I'm ready." She ended the call. She sat at the table for a long moment. Sungjin was at the window, giving her what privacy a small apartment allowed. Yun-soo was by the door. Her mother was in the kitchen, and the sounds coming from it, cabinet, water, the small percussion of someone making tea, were the sounds of a woman who understood that the best thing she could offer right now was proximity without intrusion. Zoraya put the phone face down on the table. She thought about the preliminary discussion. 6 weeks, 11 months ago. She thought about Jaemin sitting across from Kwan's representatives and entertaining the concept of the alliance while she was at home, their home, the apartment on the 41st floor with the Han River view, believing they were navigating the pressures on their marriage together. She thought about what it meant that he'd terminated it. She thought about what it meant that he hadn't told her. She thought about a man who said, "I protect people," and then protected them by keeping them in the dark about the things he was doing on their behalf. And she recognized that pattern because she had been living inside it for over a year and had called it love, and called it safety, and called it the particular silence of a man who showed rather than said. She thought about the cost of that silence now. A knock at the door. Hyun-soo answered it and spoke briefly and turned. "Building security, there's a situation on the ground floor." Zoraya looked up. "What situation?" A woman attempted to enter through the parking structure. She presented credentials identifying her as an attorney representing Kang organizational interests. Building security detained her. He paused. "The credentials are fraudulent." Her phone, which building security confiscated, contains photographs of this apartment's floor plan. The room temperature seemed to drop. "Kwan's people," Sungjin said from the window. "Yes," Hyun-soo said. Zoraya stood. The movement was controlled and careful. The movement of someone managing the gap between what their body wanted to do, which was run, and what the situation required. "How did they get the floor plan?" "Unknown." "How did they know which floor we were on?" Hyun-soo's jaw tightened. "Unknown." "2 hours ago you didn't know how Madame Kang found us either," Zoraya said. She looked at him directly. "Hyun-soo, someone in this operation is feeding information. It is not you. If it were you, we'd already be gone. But it is someone close enough to have building-specific intelligence within hours of our arrival." He met her eyes. "I know. Then we need to move, now, before they send someone who's better at getting into buildings than the last one." She turned to Sungjin. "Vancouver, how fast can you make it happen?" "Flight can be arranged within 3 hours. I have a contact at—" "Don't tell me the contact," she said. "Don't tell anyone the contact. Book it under a name that isn't mine or my mother's. Tell no one in the existing security chain, not even Jae-min." Sungjin looked at her. "Not even Jae-min," she said again. "Until I can verify where the leak is coming from, I trust 5 people in his organization. You, Hyun-soo, 3 others I haven't met." She picked up her mother's canvas bag from beside the table. "There is someone inside the circle feeding our location to Kwan's network. That person has access to internal communications, which means any channel that reaches Jaemin also potentially reaches them." Sungjin was still for a moment. "He will want to know where you are," he said. "He will know when I know it's safe to tell him," she said. "Not before." She moved to the kitchen. Her mother was standing at the counter with 2 mugs of tea, both cooling, prepared for a conversation that was about to be abbreviated. "We're leaving," Zoraya said. Eleanor looked at her face. "Set both mugs down." "Where?" "Somewhere I'll tell you in the car." Her mother picked up the canvas bag she'd never fully unpacked and said, "Let's go." They were in the elevator when Zoraya's phone vibrated. Not a call. A text from the same relay number as the night before. She opened it. 1 photograph. The parking structure entrance of this building, taken from inside. Time-stamped 8 minutes ago. And beneath it, 4 words instead of 6 this time. "Last warning. Walk away." Zarya stared at the photograph as the elevator descended. Beside her, Eleanor watched the floor numbers without a word. Sungjin stood at the panel with his phone already at his ear, the Vancouver arrangements beginning to take shape in whatever language he was speaking into it. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. And standing in the lobby, between Zarya and the exit, was not a security threat and not Madame Kang and not anyone she'd been preparing for. It was Ms. O, her former attorney. The woman who had walked her through fraudulent divorce documents with a meticulous and practiced gentleness. The woman who had been on Chairman Kwan's retainer for 8 months before Zoraya had ever walked into her office. Ms. O was standing in the lobby of a safe house she should not have known existed, and she was not wearing her usual composed professional expression. She was pale. Her hands were in front of her, fingers interlaced, and her knuckles were white. and she looked like a woman who had made a decision that had cost her more than she'd expected and was now standing at the edge of whatever came next. "I need to tell you something," Ms. O said, "before they realize I'm here." Zariah looked at her. "They know you're going to Vancouver," Ms. O said. "They've known since before Sung Jin made the call. The person feeding information isn't inside Jaemin's operation." She took a breath. Her hands were shaking slightly now, the interlaced fingers pressing harder against each other. "It's inside yours. And it isn't someone he hired." She met Zariah's eyes. "It's someone you trusted before you ever met Jaemin." The lobby was very quiet. Zariah's mouth had gone dry. "Tell me," she said. Ms. O opened her mouth, and the lobby's fire door slammed open behind her, and two men came through it fast, and the first one had his hand extended toward Ms. O before anyone in the lobby had fully processed what was. The first man's hand closed around Ms. O's arm before Hyun-soo had fully cleared the lobby threshold. What happened in the next 4 seconds was not choreographed. It was the collision of bodies and momentum in a space too small for the number of people suddenly occupying it. Hyun-soo moving left and fast, the second security officer breaking from the elevator bank, the first man yanking Ms. O backward, while the second came through the fire door with his shoulder already lowered. Zariah grabbed her mother's arm and pulled, not away from the door, away from the center of the lobby, toward the building manager's office. A recessed doorway she'd clocked when they arrived the previous night, the particular habit of a woman who'd spent months learning to notice exits. Eleanor moved with her without being told, the canvas bag clutched to her chest, both of them pressing into the alcove as the lobby erupted behind them. She heard impact, the specific sound of a body against a wall, different from the sound in movies, heavier, duller, with a grunt that cut off suddenly. She didn't look. She pressed her mother against the wall with one arm across her and used her other hand to try the office door. Locked. She turned. Hyun-soo had the first man down. The second man had gotten past the security officer and was 3 feet from Zariah when Sung Jin, who she had not seen move, stepped out of the elevator alcove and did something fast and precise that she couldn't entirely track, and the second man hit the floor with his wrist bent at an angle it was not designed for. The lobby went quiet in the sudden way that violence goes quiet when it's over. Ms. O was on her knees beside the elevator bank, one hand pressed against her mouth. Her composure dissolved entirely. The two men were down. Hyun-soo was already on his phone. The security officer was at the fire door holding it, checking the stairwell beyond. Zariah stepped out of the alcove. Her heart was hitting her sternum in long, heavy strokes. She was aware of it the way you become aware of your own breathing during a panic. Mechanical, loud, impossible to ignore. The baby had gone still, which sometimes happened when her adrenaline spiked, and the stillness made the fear worse in a specific and personal way that had nothing to do with the two men on the floor. "Ms. O," she said. The woman looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed. There was a mark developing on her forearm where the first man had grabbed her. "Get up," Zariah said. "Get up and finish what you were saying." Ms. O got to her feet. She was shaking, not the contained trembling of someone managing fear, the full-body shake of someone who had crossed a line they hadn't been sure they could cross, and was now standing on the other side of it. "The person feeding your location," Ms. O said. Her voice was wrecked. "It's your assistant, the one you've had for 3 years, Priya." The name was a flat stone dropped into standing water. Zariah heard it and did nothing with her face. "Priya works for Kwan's network," Ms. O continued. "She was placed with you 14 months ago through a staffing referral that I arranged. She stopped. Her jaw worked. "I arranged it. Kwan's office told me she was just an observer, that she would monitor and report your movements, and that you would never be physically threatened." Her voice cracked on the last word. "That was what they told me." "But that changed," Zariah said. 3 days ago it changed, when the airport photographs went public. Kwan moved from containment to elimination." She pressed her fingers against her mouth again briefly. "I have been trying to reach you since yesterday. My communications are monitored. Everything I send through normal channels goes to Kwan's office first. The only way to reach you was in person." She looked at Zariah with the specific exhaustion of someone who has spent a long time being complicit in something and finally run out of the capacity to keep doing it. Priya knows about Vancouver. She heard Sungjin's call. Sungjin had not made that call in front of anyone. Zaraya turned to him. He was looking at his phone. His face had gone to the tight, contained blankness of a man doing rapid damage assessment. The call was on the building's Wi-Fi network. If her device was connected, she was in the next room, Zaraya said. She was in the next room the entire time. She thought about Priya. 3 years of Priya. Priya who knew her calendar, her habits, her doctors, her mother's address. Priya who had recommended Miss O when Zaraya had mentioned needing a Korean-speaking attorney. The referral that Ms. Park had identified as manufactured. Manufactured by Ms. O. And Ms. O had been directed by Kwan's office. And Kwan's office had placed Priya 14 months ago. The architecture of it was so complete that for a moment she couldn't locate the edges of it. It had no edges. It was everything around her. Where is she now? Zaraya said. I don't know, Ms. O said. When I left to come here, she was still at your apartment. My mother's house, Zaraya said. Her voice came out flat. She has access to my mother's house. Eleanor made a sound. Not a word. Something below words. Zaraya was already calling. The number rang 4 times and went to voicemail, and she called again, and on the 3rd attempt the line connected and Priya's voice came through, warm, familiar, the voice that had been in her ear for 3 years, saying, Hey, I was just about to call you. Don't talk, Zaraya said. Listen. A pause. Zaraya. How long? Zaraya said. Silence. How long have you been reporting to Kwan's network? The silence on the other end had a quality that answered the question before the words came. It was not the silence of confusion or of innocent misunderstanding. It was the silence of someone recalculating. It's not what... How long, Priya? 14 months. The words came out stripped of everything, flat. I'm sorry. Zaraya's hand was so tight on the phone that the case was creaking. You recommended Ms. O, she said. Yes. You knew about the forged documents. I knew there were documents. I didn't know the specifics. You knew enough, Zaraya said. You watched me sign papers you knew were fraudulent. You watched me spend 5 months believing my marriage was over. Her voice stopped, restarted. You were in the room when I found out I was pregnant. You were the first person I told. The silence from Priya was the worst silence of the entire conversation. I reported it, Priya said, very quietly. The lobby of the safe house building felt very small. Zaraya's mother had her hand against the wall, head slightly down, absorbing this. Sungjin was very still. Hyunsu was watching Zaraya with the expression of someone prepared to respond to whatever happened next. You reported my pregnancy to Chairman Kwan's network, Zaraya said. Yes. Before I told anyone else. Yes. She ended the call. She stood in the lobby for 5 seconds. Then she looked at Hyunsu and said, We need to leave this building in the next 10 minutes. Different vehicle from last night, different route. Nobody who was in this building's communication chain gets the destination. She looked at Sungjin. Cancel Vancouver. Book something else. Different city. Tell me the destination verbally, in this room, to me and my mother only. Sungjin was already on it. She looked at Miss O. You're coming with us. Mrs. O blinked. You came here to tell me something. You haven't finished telling me. And you are now a loose end for Kwan's network the same way I am. She picked up her carry-on. Unless you'd prefer to stay. Miss O did not prefer to stay. They were in a vehicle, different from the previous night. A gray commercial van from a fleet service that Sungjin sourced in 11 minutes. And moving through Los Angeles traffic within the time window Zaraya had specified. She sat in the middle row with her mother. Miss O was in the back with the second security officer. Hyunsu drove. Sungjin was in the passenger seat speaking Korean into his phone at a volume that communicated urgency without volume. Zaraya looked out the window at the city. She was 22 weeks pregnant, sitting in a commercial van with her mother and a woman who'd helped engineer her destruction, running from a network that had been inside her life for over a year, on her way to an undisclosed location in a city that Sungjin had told only her and Eleanor in a whisper before they got in the vehicle. She thought about Priya. 3 years. The birthday she'd spent in Seoul when her mother couldn't come, and Priya had shown up with food and stayed until midnight. The week after the first ultrasound, when Zariah had been unable to stop shaking with the reality of it, and Priya had sat on the floor with her and not said anything particularly useful and not left. All of that, real or performed or something complicated in between. She pressed her hand against her stomach and felt the flutter return, tentative and then more certain, as if the baby had registered the return of something like calm in her body and was responding to it. "Sungjin," she said. He turned from the passenger seat. "Call Jaemin. Don't tell him where we are. Tell him about Priya. Tell him about Ms. O. Tell him I need him to do one thing." "What thing?" "Find out what Kwon knows about my son's medical situation." Her voice was level. "Priya was in the room at every appointment for the first 14 weeks. She drove me to the specialist. She has the name of my perinatologist, my hospital, my monitoring schedule." She paused. "If Kwon has that information and he's moved from containment to elimination, then this isn't only about me anymore." Sungjin turned to the front and made the call. She heard him speak. Heard Jae-min's response. One word, sharp, in Korean, that she didn't need translated. The van moved through traffic. Los Angeles spread around them in every direction, vast and bright and entirely indifferent. 20 minutes later, they were in a hotel in Burbank that Sungjin had booked under a corporate name linked to a shell entity that Zariah had no knowledge of and therefore no way of having communicated to anyone. 7th floor, corner room. 2 security officers Sungjin had sourced from a separate contact arrived within 30 minutes. Men who had not been in contact with the Koreatown operation. Clean start, as clean as possible. Zariah sat on the edge of the hotel bed. Her back was doing the low grinding ache again. She took off her shoes and pressed both feet flat on the floor and looked at the industrial carpet and breathed. Her mother brought her water without being asked. Miss O sat in the chair by the window with her hands in her lap and her composure partially reassembled. Enough for function, not enough for pretense. "Finish," Zariah said. Miss O looked at her. "You said you needed to tell me something before they realized you were gone. The 2 men were Kwon's, which means Kwon's network knows you came to me. You've already crossed whatever line you were standing at." Zariah held the water glass in both hands. "Finish what you came to say." Ms. O exhaled. "The document Madam Kang brought you. The preliminary discussion agreement. What about it?" "It's real," Ms. O said. "But it's incomplete. There's a second page." She reached into the inner pocket of her jacket and produced a folded sheet. "I made a copy 8 months ago when I still thought I could find a way out of this without—" She stopped. Set the sheet on the bed beside Zariah. The second page details what Jae-min offered as a concession during the preliminary discussion, to demonstrate good faith toward the alliance. Zariah looked at the sheet. She did not pick it up immediately. She looked at it the way you look at something you understand is going to change the shape of the next few hours, and you allow yourself one moment before the change. Then she picked it up and read it. The concession, as outlined in the document's second page, was a single commitment, a voluntary limitation on international organizational activities in 2 specific market sectors for a period of 2 years, a concession that would have cost Jae-min's organization approximately 40% of its external revenue during that window. Not devastating, but significant. The kind of concession that demonstrated genuine interest in making an alliance work. She read the date. The date of the concession commitment was a Thursday in February. She and Jae-min had been trying to have a child since the previous October. She sat with that for a moment. The specific collision of those 2 facts, a man trying to start a family on one hand, a man making concessions toward a political alliance with another family's daughter on the other, and the 6-week window in which both things had been true simultaneously. She set the paper down. "He made this commitment," she said, and then terminated the discussion. 4 weeks after making it, yes, Ms. O said. "What made him terminate?" Ms. O paused. "According to the file I was given access to, Kwon's internal assessment, Mr. Kang terminated the discussion the week after discovering that Kwon's network had placed an asset close to him. He didn't know who or how many. He suspected the discussion itself had been compromised. He pulled out. He found out Kwon had someone inside his circle," Zariah said. "Yes. But he didn't find out about Priya." "Priya was on your side of the circle," Ms. O said carefully. "Not his." Zariah looked at the window. The Burbank sky was flat and white. Beyond it, somewhere under the same flat sky, the structures that had been built around her life for over a year were beginning to fracture, because Ms. O had walked into a safe house lobby and Kwan's men had come through a fire door, and a woman who had sat on the floor with her after an ultrasound had said yes when asked how long. Her phone rang. Jae Min. She answered. "Tell me," she said. "Kwan's network has your perinatologist's name, the hospital, and your monitoring schedule through week 22. His voice was stripped of everything except information. Priya sent a detailed summary to a relay address 6 days ago, before the airport, before any of this became visible. The monitoring schedule through week 22. He's been planning around my medical timeline, she said. Yes, there is a window in your protocol, week 23, the gap between your standard monitoring appointments, where you would normally be without a medical support structure for 4 days. A pause. That window begins in 72 hours. 72 hours. He's been waiting for it, Zoraya said. Yes. She pressed her free hand against her stomach. The flutter was there. Continuous. Her son, entirely unconcerned with timelines and windows, and the patience of men who built operations around the vulnerabilities of others. What does he want? She said. Specifically, not the political position, not the contracts. What does Kwan actually want from you in exchange for leaving us alone? The pause from Seoul was brief. Full withdrawal from the Southern Distribution Network, Jae Min said. My organization's exit from 3 infrastructure contracts, and my signature on a document acknowledging that the preliminary discussion constituted a binding agreement which would retroactively give his office legal leverage over my organizational structure for the next 7 years. He wants your signature on a fabricated obligation, yes. And if you sign it, I lose the Southern contracts. I lose the infrastructure positions. I lose approximately 60% of the organization's legitimate revenue base and all of the political cover that comes with it. A beat. And I give Kwan's office legal grounds to interfere in my business operations for 7 years. What's the alternative? The alternative, he said, is that I don't sign it, and he uses the 72-hour window. She was quiet. Zoraya, don't, she said. Don't tell me what you've decided. I know what you've decided. I need you to not tell me so that I can tell you something first. A silence. All right. I have Ms. O. She has documentation. I have enough to take to the international press about Kwan's network, the forged documents, the placed assets, the fabricated photographs, the monitoring of a pregnant American citizen. That's not a Korean story. That's a story that crosses into American jurisdiction and European financial regulation and at least 4 treaty obligations involving data privacy. She could hear him breathing on the other end. That's a nuclear option, he said. I know what it is. If we release it without a controlled structure, Kwan's lawyers, I know what his lawyers will do. I also know that a public scandal of this scope gives him a problem he can't solve quietly. She pressed her hand flat against the bed. He built this entire operation on quiet, on invisible pressure, on things that couldn't be proven or traced. The moment it's visible, it changes the calculation. It puts you in the center of a very visible target, he said. I'm already in the center of a target, she said. The difference is right now the target is invisible and I'm in it alone. I would rather be in a visible target with my name attached to the reason it's visible. She paused. I would rather fight a war people can see than be managed by one they can't. The silence from Seoul lasted longer this time. What do you need from me? He said. I need you to trust me for the next 48 hours, she said. I need you to not move on Kwan independently. I need you to hold whatever you've decided to sacrifice and wait. And if the 48 hours don't work, then you do what you were going to do anyway, she said. But give me the 48 hours first. She heard him exhale, a long, controlled breath, the kind you take when you're choosing to put something down that you've been carrying. 48 hours, he said. Yes. Zoraya. What? The pause before he spoke had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Something below the careful and the controlled. Something that had been there since the airport and hadn't found its way into words until now. I should have told you about the preliminary discussion, he said. Not because it changes what it was. Because you deserve to know what I was navigating, and I chose to navigate it alone. I have been doing that our entire marriage, choosing to handle things alone because I decided that protecting you meant keeping things from you. Another breath. I was wrong. I've been wrong about that for a long time. She held the phone. I know, she said. That's not an apology. I know it's not enough for one. No, she said. It's not. But it's true. I know it's true, she said. That's the complicated part. She ended the call. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed in Burbank with the second page of the preliminary discussion document in her lap and her mother in the chair across from her and Miss O at the window, and Sung Jin's voice audible through the wall as he coordinated whatever he was coordinating, and she thought about 48 hours. 72 until the monitoring window. 48 to do something with the documents in her possession. And somewhere in Seoul, a man who had just told the truth with nothing left to manage it with, sitting with the phone in his hand and the empire he'd built for 15 years and the calculation of what it was worth, with her on one side of the scale. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. New relay, different from the previous ones, that contained no words at all. Only an address in downtown Los Angeles and a time. 10 a.m. tomorrow. Below it, a single line. Chairman Kwon would like to meet. She stared at it. The baby moved. Sharp. Definitive. The full-body roll that the perinatologist had told her meant he was healthy and strong and entirely indifferent to the world's complications. She pressed her palm flat against it and felt the movement continue, and she sat very still and let the decision come into focus. The way decisions come into focus when you've run out of every other option and what's left is the thing that was always going to be the answer. She typed back, "I'll be there." Sent it. And somewhere in downtown Los Angeles, in whatever room Chairman Kwon was sitting in, a man who had spent 14 months being certain he controlled every variable in this situation, read her reply and understood for the first time that he had. The address was a building in the financial district. Not a hotel meeting room, not a restaurant. A building, 40 stories of glass and poured concrete with a lobby that had the particular blankness of architecture designed to communicate permanence rather than welcome. The kind of building that said the person inside it had stopped needing to impress anyone and had started simply occupying space the way weather occupies space, as a fact rather than a choice. Zariah stood on the sidewalk outside it at 9:53 a.m. and looked up at it for a moment. Yunsu was at her left shoulder. Sungjin was somewhere behind her in a position she hadn't asked about because she trusted him to be where he needed to be. Miss O had spent the previous night in the hotel room adjacent to Zariah's, and in the morning had handed over a flash drive containing every document she had retained from her 14 months working under Kwon's retainer. Ms. Park had received a copy at 6 a.m. A second copy had gone to a journalist at the Los Angeles Times whose name Ms. O had provided. A journalist who had been investigating Kwon's network's American financial operations for 8 months and needed only a clean evidentiary thread to pull. The thread had been pulled at 7:15 a.m. Zariah didn't know yet what that meant in practical terms. She knew it meant that the conversation she was about to have was happening inside a window that was closing, and that Chairman Kwon either knew the window was closing or was about to find out, and that the difference between those two things would determine the temperature of the room she was walking into. She had called Jae-min at 8. "I'm going in at 10, she'd said. "I know." A pause. "I should be there." "No." "Zariah, he called the meeting with me," she said. "Not you. He called it with me because he believes I am the variable he can still control. He thinks I'm going to this meeting because I'm afraid, and he's offering me a way out." She had been standing at the hotel window watching the Burbank morning. "If you're there, it becomes a different meeting. It becomes the meeting he's been trying to have with you for 2 years. I need it to stay the meeting he thinks he called." The pause from Seoul was the pause of a man choosing not to say 3 things. "All right," he'd said. "When it's over, I'll call you. I'll be awake." She had almost said something else. She had felt it sitting at the back of her throat, something that wasn't information or strategy or logistics, and she had let it stay there, unspoken, because the time for it wasn't a hotel room at 8 in the morning with 48 hours of accumulated wreckage around her. The time for it was after. If there was an after. She went into the building. The lobby security knew her name. That told her everything about how thoroughly Kwon had been managing this encounter. The advanced preparation, the calm expectation of her arrival, The smile from the security officer that said we were told you were coming rather than can I help you. She was directed to an elevator bank on the left and told the 41st floor, and she rode up alone with Hyun-soo and watched the numbers climb. The 41st floor was a conference suite that took up the building's entire north face, floor-to-ceiling glass looking out over downtown Los Angeles. Cities spread beneath it in every direction, flat and gray and enormous, the kind of view that cost money specifically because of what it implied about the person looking down at it. Chairman Kwon was standing at the glass when she came in. He was shorter than she'd expected. Photographs had conveyed authority, and the authority had implied physical scale. But in person, he was a compact man in his mid-60s with a face that had been weathered by something other than weather, by decades of rooms like this one, of decisions with large consequences and the specific internal erosion that came from making them without visible cost. He wore a navy suit, and he turned from the window when she entered, and he looked at her with an expression that she recognized immediately and with absolute clarity. It was the expression of a man who had already decided the outcome. She had been in rooms with men who had already decided the outcome. She knew how to be in those rooms. She sat down without being invited to. There was a table between them, long, polished, with 2 chairs on each side. She sat on the side facing the window, which put the city behind her and the room in front of her. And she put her bag on the table and her hands in her lap, and she looked at Kwon and waited. He sat across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She let the silence run. She had learned in the past 48 hours that silence was not the absence of pressure. It was pressure, applied by whoever was willing to hold it longer. "You sent documents to the Times," Kwon said. Not a question, not a surprise. A confirmation, delivered with the flat affect of someone who had expected this and had already calculated past it. "This morning," she said. "The journalist you used has been running a dead-end investigation for 8 months," he said. "The documents you provided may extend that investigation somewhat. It will not produce a story within any time frame that is relevant to your current situation." "My current situation," she said, "which is, you are 22 weeks pregnant outside your medical support infrastructure, being moved between secured locations by a man who is trying to protect you with resources that are significantly outmatched by mine." He folded his hands on the table. "And in approximately 40 hours, you will need to return to a medical facility for your scheduled monitoring appointment, at which point your location becomes predictable." She looked at him. "You built this operation over 14 months, she said. "You placed an asset in my personal staff. You compromised my attorney. You forged legal documents, fabricated photographic evidence, and engineered the collapse of my marriage." She kept her voice even. "And then you invited me to a meeting." "I invited you because you're intelligent," he said. "You're the first person in this entire situation to respond unpredictably." A pause. "Jaemin, I understand. I have understood him for 2 years. He protects, he calculates. He sacrifices assets to preserve what he values most. Predictable." His eyes moved briefly to her stomach. I underestimated." "I know," she said. "That is not a compliment I offer carelessly." "I'm not here for your compliments." He studied her for a moment. "What are you here for?" "I'm here to tell you what's going to happen," she said. "Not to negotiate, not to accept terms, to tell you." Something moved in his face, not quite surprise. The recalibration of a man who has walked into a room expecting a specific dynamic and found a different one. "The documents Miss O provided are currently in the hands of 3 separate parties," Zoraya said. "Miss Park, who is a licensed attorney with obligations under Korean and international law, the Times journalist whose editor has already been briefed, and a regulatory compliance officer at the Korean Financial Services Commission whose name I am not going to share with you." She watched his face. "The FSC contact is the one that matters most to you, I think, because the FSC inquiry will not be about me. It will be about the financial structures your network used to fund the surveillance and document fabrication operation. Those structures cross 4 jurisdictions and involve capital movements that your legal team cannot retroactively sanitize." Kwon's hands on the table had not moved. "That is a significant claim," he said. "Miss O kept very detailed records," Zoraya said. "She is a meticulous woman. It's what made her useful to you and what makes her dangerous to you now." A silence. "What do you want?" he said. "I want you to understand something," she said. "Not as a negotiating position. As a fact. She leaned forward slightly, both forearms on the table. You built this operation around the assumption that I was a temporary problem. A foreign woman without structural roots in your political landscape, with no organizational backing, with every reason to take a quiet settlement and disappear. She held his eyes. You were right about all of it. 6 months ago, you were right about all of it. And now, he said, now I have nothing left to protect by being quiet, she said. You took the marriage. You took the sense of safety. You took my trust in my own attorney, my own assistant, my own understanding of what was real. You took a year of my life, and you took it through the person I told first when I found out I was pregnant. Her voice did not break. She had decided it would not break in this room. When there is nothing left to protect by staying quiet, quiet becomes the only thing you have left to take, and I'm not giving it to you. Imi, Quan looked at her for a long moment. The documents go public, he said, and Jae-min's organizational exposure goes with them. The preliminary discussion document is a document describing a terminated preliminary discussion, she said. His legal team has 17 different ways to contextualize it. Yours has none, because his team is managing a business negotiation and yours is managing a criminal conspiracy. She sat back. You don't have leverage over him with that document. You never did. You had leverage over me with it, which is different. And now you know what it is. And now I know what it is, she said, which makes it useless. The city spread out behind her, 41 floors down, indifferent and enormous. Quan looked at the table for a moment. When he looked up, the quality in his eyes had changed. Not softened. Nothing in this man softened, but shifted. The particular shift of a person who has been running a calculation and has arrived at the point where the numbers stop working. What are your terms? He said. I told you, I'm not here to negotiate terms. Then what? I'm here to tell you that the choice you had 6 months ago, quiet settlement, disappeared problem, cleared path, is gone, she said. That window is closed. What's in front of you now is either a public exposure that you survive in diminished form, or a public exposure that you don't survive at all. The difference between those outcomes depends entirely on whether your legal team is faster than Ms. Parks. She stood. I'd call them, she said. Today. She picked up her bag. Hyun-soo was already at the door. She moved toward it, and she did not look back at Kwon, because looking back was the thing you did when you weren't sure you'd said everything you needed to say, and she was sure. She was in the elevator descending when her phone rang. Ms. Park. The FSC inquiry has been opened, Ms. Park said without preamble. Formally, 20 minutes ago. It will be public within the hour. Zariah closed her eyes for 2 seconds, opened them. And the times? The editor called me at 9:50. They're running a digital piece this afternoon. Full print tomorrow. A pause. Zariah, this is going to be very loud. I know. Are you ready for that? She thought about it. Truly thought about it. The loudness, the visibility, the specific kind of exposure that came from being at the center of a story this size. Her name, her face, her pregnancy. All of it public, all of it scrutinized, all of it permanently attached to an international scandal involving political corruption and organized crime. She thought about the alternative. Yes, she said, I'm ready. She called Jae-min from the sidewalk outside the building. He answered immediately. It's done, she said. A silence. Then, are you all right? Yes. The FSC. I know. Ms. Park just called. She stood on the sidewalk with the Los Angeles sun finally breaking through the overcast overhead, thin and pale, but present. It's going to be loud. I know. A beat. My legal team has been briefed. We're ahead of it. The preliminary discussion document will be contextualized accurately, he said. A terminated preliminary discussion is not an agreement. Kwon's lawyers know that. They were hoping you didn't. He paused. How did he take it? Like a man who's been certain about something for a long time and has just found out he was wrong, she said. A beat. Zariah, I know what you're going to say. Then I won't say it yet, he said. Come home first. She stood on the sidewalk. I need my medical records transferred to Seoul Central Medical Center, she said. My perinatologist here will coordinate. I'll need a recommendation for an equivalent specialist in Seoul. She paused. And I need my mother to have a room that isn't a guest room. She's not staying in a guest room. She heard something change in his breathing, the quality of breath changing when you've been holding something and you set it down. I'll have it arranged before you land, he said. I'm not forgiving everything, she said. The preliminary discussion, the omission. I'm not... She stopped. I'm carrying a very large amount of things right now, and I cannot process all of them at once. I need you to understand that. I understand, he said. I'm not asking you to process anything on my schedule. I know you're not, she said. That's partly why I'm coming back. She ended the call. She stood for a moment longer on the sidewalk, one hand on her stomach, the pale sun on her face, the city loud and indifferent around her. Then she turned to Hyunsu and said, "Book the flights." The next 72 hours were loud in exactly the way Ms. Park had predicted. The FSC inquiry went public at 11:47 a.m. By 2 p.m., 3 Korean financial news outlets had picked it up. By 6 p.m., it had crossed into international business coverage. The Times piece ran online at 4 p.m., and by evening had been cited by outlets in 7 countries. The specific details, the forged divorce documents, the fabricated photographs, the placed assets, the monitoring of an American citizen, generated the kind of coverage that Kwon's network had been built specifically to prevent. Clean, documented, sourced, and entirely beyond retroactive management. Kwon's legal team issued a statement at 8 p.m. denying operational involvement. The statement used careful language and raised more questions than it answered, which was exactly the problem with statements issued against documented evidence. Zoraya read none of it. She was on a flight to Seoul. Eleanor Brooks slept in the seat beside her, the canvas bag under her feet, her breathing the same slow rhythm it always was, the undefeatable sleep of a woman who had learned long ago that the world's complications did not pause for rest, and that rest was therefore not optional. Zoraya looked at her mother's face in the dim cabin and thought about 14 months and all the things that had been built around her without her knowledge. And she thought about the fact that Eleanor had packed in 4 minutes and not asked questions until they were moving, and she thought, this woman is the only person who has never been a variable in anyone else's operation. She pressed her hand against her stomach and felt the familiar flutter, reliable as weather, and she sat in the dark cabin over the Pacific and let the loudness of the past 3 days settle into something quieter. She did not sleep. She thought about everything she was carrying into Seoul, the anger, which was real and not performed and not going to disappear because the situation had resolved. The grief for what the 14 months had cost, not just the marriage she'd thought was ending, but the version of herself she'd been before she'd learned what it felt like to be inside a fiction someone else had written. The complicated thing that existed alongside the anger, the thing she hadn't named aloud yet, which was that she had walked into a room with Chairman Kwon alone and said exactly what she'd needed to say, and she had come out the other side of it standing upright, and that was something that belonged to her entirely and could not be taken back. She landed in Seoul in the early morning. Gray sky, the familiar smell of the city, the particular quality of Korean autumn air that she had first encountered 4 years ago as a woman who had not yet met Jaemin and had not yet understood what the next 4 years would hold. He was at the airport, not at the gate. In the arrivals hall, standing to the side of the main flow of people, without his security detail positioned at ostentatious intervals. Just standing. He looked like a man who had not slept, which she recognized because she looked like a woman who had not slept, and they were matched in their exhaustion in a way that felt more honest than anything polished could have. Eleanor saw him first. She looked at Zoraya and said very quietly, "I'll find the car," and she walked away with her canvas bag and left them to it. Zoraya stopped in front of him. He looked at her face, then, briefly, at her stomach, then back at her face, and he kept his hands at his sides because he understood, without her saying it, that she would determine the distance. "The apartment," she said. "The one we had. Is it—" "It's yours," he said. "It's been yours. I haven't changed anything." She nodded once. "I need my own room." "Yes." "Not permanently," she said. "I need—" She stopped, looked for the right word. "I need the space to come to things at my own speed. Not because I've decided anything, because I need to be the one deciding." "I know," he said. "You've always thought you knew what I needed," she said. "Sometimes you were right. The parts where you were right made the parts where you were wrong much harder to separate out. She held his gaze. I need you to stop deciding what I need and start asking. He was quiet for a moment. The arrivals hall moved around them, the flow of people, the sound of rolling bags and reunions and announcements. What do you need right now? He said. Careful. Genuine. She thought about it. Breakfast, she said, and my mother in a real room, and a doctor's appointment this week with someone I choose. She paused. And time. All of that, he said. I can do. They walked toward the exit together, not touching, with the space between them that she had asked for and he had given without argument, and that space felt different from the space that had existed between them for 6 months. That space had been manufactured, imposed, built on forged documents and engineered photographs. This space was real. She had made it herself. She would decide when it closed. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it. She stood in the entrance hall and looked at the hallway and the living room visible beyond it and the Han River through the floor-to-ceiling glass, gray and wide and quiet in the early morning light. The painting she'd bought at a gallery in Insadong was still on the wall where she'd hung it. The specific disorder of her bookshelves, her system, incomprehensible to him, perfectly logical to her, was undisturbed. She walked to the window and looked out. Behind her, she heard Eleanor and Jae-min exchanging a few words in the entrance hall. Her mother's voice matter-of-fact, his voice careful, and then the sound of a door, and then Jae-min was in the doorway of the living room. The guest room is the second door on the right, he said. For your mother. I've stocked it as a permanent room, not a guest room. Eleanor appeared behind him with her canvas bag. She looked over his shoulder at Zariah. Zariah nodded. Her mother went down the hall. Jae-min stayed in the doorway. Come in, Zariah said. It's your apartment. It's your home, he said. There's a difference. She turned from the window and looked at him. He was still in the same suit he'd been wearing when she arrived, which meant he'd come to the airport directly from wherever he'd been when her flight landed, which meant he'd been awake all night. There were marks under his eyes that she recognized. Not the marks of one bad night, but the accumulated marks of many, the kind that took weeks to build. You didn't sleep, she said. No. Since when? Since the airport in Incheon, he said. When I thought you were leaving the country. I slept 4 hours somewhere in the 3 days after that, and I haven't counted properly since. She studied him. Sit down, she said, before you fall down. He sat on the couch, not the controlled, composed posture she was accustomed to. He sat the way exhausted people sit, spine against the back, head slightly dropped, the long release of a body that has been held upright by will for too long. She sat in the chair across from him. I need to tell you something, she said. He looked up. When I went to that meeting yesterday, she said, I went alone because I needed to know I could. Not because I didn't want you there, because I needed to find out whether I was someone who could walk into that room and say what needed to be said without someone else's weight behind me. She looked at her hands. I've been someone's wife, someone's employee, someone's daughter, someone's patient for my entire adult life. I needed to be just myself in that room. And, he said, and I was, she said. I was just myself and it was enough. She looked up. That matters to me. That's mine now and I'm keeping it. You should, he said. You earned it. I didn't earn it, she said. It was always mine. I just found it. He was quiet for a moment. The preliminary discussion, he said. We're not doing that tonight, she said. We're doing that, but not tonight. Tonight I need to eat something and sleep and make sure my son's heartbeat is where it should be. The rest of it, she exhaled. The rest of it is there and it's real, and we're going to have every conversation that needs to happen, but not tonight. Okay, he said. I'm not saying that to protect you, she said. I'm saying it because I've been running on adrenaline for 4 days, and I'm 22 weeks pregnant, and my body is communicating with me in terms that are not optional. She looked at him. When I'm ready, I will say so. And when I say so, I need you to show up fully. No management, no protected versions. Yes, he said. And then, with a quality she hadn't heard from him before, unguarded, no architecture around it. I'm sorry. I know, she said. Not for the preliminary discussion only, he said, for the entire pattern, for deciding what you could handle. for building walls around you and calling them protection. He looked at her steadily. I have been protecting people by keeping them in the dark my entire life, and I have told myself that was love, and it wasn't. It was control that I was more comfortable with than honest fear. She sat with that. That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me, she said. I know. It doesn't fix anything. I know that too. But it's where you have to start, she said. If there's a start. He looked at her. Is there? She looked back. Ask me again in a few months, she said, when I'm not running on empty and our son is here and we have both slept for more than 4 hours. She stood. But don't ask me like you're afraid of the answer. Ask me because you want to know. He stood too. They were a few feet apart, in the living room of the apartment with the Han River gray and wide behind the glass, and the morning was fully arrived now, the sky lightening slowly over the city. Go to sleep, she said. You're no use to anyone like this. Are you? I'm going to eat something and call Ms. Park and then sleep, she said. I'll be here when you wake up. Something in his face shifted and settled. The specific settling of a person who has been holding themselves together against an outcome and has just been told the outcome is not the worst one. He went to bed. She stood at the window for a while longer. The city below was waking up. The first delivery trucks, the early joggers along the riverside path, the lights in the apartment buildings coming on one by one as Seoul assembled itself into another day. She had stood at this window before and looked at this city and felt like a visitor inside her own life. She looked at it now and felt something different. Not belonging, exactly. Not yet. Something more provisional than belonging. She was here. She had chosen to be here. That was enough for today. She called Ms. Park. The FSC inquiry is progressing, Ms. Park said. Kwan's legal team filed a response this morning. It will buy him time but not resolution. The Times piece has generated 3 additional press inquiries from Korean outlets requesting documentation. A pause. His political coalition is beginning to move away from him. 2 of his primary allied legislators released statements this morning suggesting they were unaware of the network's operations. Rats leaving, Zariah said. Efficiently, Ms. Park confirmed. I expect formal charges within 3 to 4 months. The civil exposure on the document forgery alone is significant. And Miss O, she is cooperating fully with 2 separate inquiries. I've arranged independent legal representation for her. A pause. She asked me to tell you that she is aware that an apology is insufficient. It is, Zariah said. I told her that too, Ms. Park said. Zariah thanked her and ended the call. She went to the kitchen and made tea because the coffee machine required more cognition than she currently had. And she stood at the kitchen counter and drank it and ate the fruit that was in the refrigerator. Someone had stocked the refrigerator, Jamin or someone he'd directed, and she didn't examine the feeling that produced. And she placed her hand flat on her stomach and felt her son moving in the slow, ongoing way he moved in the early morning when she was calm. He had been moving through all of it, through airports and safe houses and 41st floor conference rooms and hotel rooms in Burbank, and arguments and revelations and the particular darkness of flying over the Pacific at night. Always moving. Small and determined and entirely located in the present tense, indifferent to everything that wasn't the immediate fact of his own continuing. She thought there was something in that worth learning. She went to the room Jamin had prepared for her. Separate, as she'd asked, its own space. And she lay down on the bed without fully undressing, her hand on her stomach, and she looked at the ceiling of the apartment she had once lived in as someone else's wife, and was now choosing to return to as herself. The city outside continued its noise. The river moved the way rivers move, indifferent to everything built beside them. And inside her son moved in small, continuous circles, alive and present, and already, she understood, entirely his own person. She closed her eyes. 3 weeks later, she was sitting in the waiting area of Seoul Central Medical Center when the monitoring appointment confirmed that her son was exactly where he should be. Heartbeat strong, weight appropriate, position correct. The perinatologist, a precise and unhurried woman named Dr. Shin, whom Zariah had chosen herself from a list she had compiled herself, showed her the screen with the satisfaction of someone who enjoyed delivering good news. Everything is excellent, Dr. Shin said. Zariah looked at the screen for a long moment. Yes, she said. It is. Jamin was in the waiting room when she came out. He stood when he saw her face, and she said, "Everything's good," and watched the thing that moved through his expression. Not composed, not managed, just real. And she let herself see it without flinching. They walked to the car in the gray Seoul afternoon, close enough that their arms nearly touched and far enough that the space was still hers. "Dr. Shin says 8 more weeks, approximately," Zariah said. 8 weeks, he said. She said to expect him early. Not dangerously early, just... She paused. "He seems impatient." Jaemin looked at her, and she saw the beginning of something that was almost a smile, the thing that happened to his face when something caught him genuinely off guard. "I wonder where he gets that." "Don't," she said. But she felt it too, the thing that pulled at the corners of her mouth despite everything, despite the 8 weeks and the unfinished conversations and the distance she was still maintaining with deliberate care. They got in the car. Outside, Seoul moved around them. The specific density of the city, its layers of old and new, the river visible between buildings as they drove, gray and constant and unimpressed by everything built along its banks. "I want to tell you his name," she said. Jaemin looked at her. "I had a name," she said. "I've had it for weeks. I didn't say it because saying it felt like..." She stopped. "It felt like something I needed to be sure about first." "And now," he said. She looked out the window. "Cairo," she said. "Cairo Sun." The name sat in the car between them, new and solid. Jaemin was quiet for a moment. She could feel him with the name the way you feel someone receiving something, the quality of how they hold it. "Cairo Sun," he said. "It means something to me," she said. "It doesn't need to mean the same thing to you." "What does it mean to you?" he said. She watched the river between the buildings. "It means he came through something hard to get here," she said. "And he's still here. And that's enough to name a person after." Jaemin looked at the road ahead. "It's enough," he said quietly, "to name a life after." She turned her head and looked at his profile. The exhaustion that had lived in his face for weeks had begun to lift. Not gone, not resolved, but lightening the way sky lightens before the sun actually appears. She looked at him and thought about all the versions of this moment she'd imagined over the past 6 months. The angry ones, the absent ones, the versions where she never came back, and the versions where coming back meant losing something she'd found in the leaving. None of those versions had included this one. This one was quieter, more honest, more costly, in the particular way that things cost more when they're real. She turned back to the window. 8 weeks, she said. 8 weeks, he said. Outside, Seoul continued. The river ran parallel to the road and then turned and was lost behind buildings and then appeared again farther on, the way rivers do. Disappearing and returning, the same water moving through different light, carrying everything that had been placed in it and continuing regardless. She pressed her hand against her stomach. Cairo's sun moved. She kept her eyes on the city and felt him, steady and certain, already making his presence known in the only language available to him, simple, undeniable, and entirely his own. The car moved through the city. They went home.